As consumer and regulatory pressure put plastic in the spotlight, the next few years looks to be pivotal in the area of food packaging. What are the key drivers in developing packaging, and what should cold processors and manufacturers know to prepare for looming legislation and its impact on refrigerated and frozen food packaging? I'm Kelly Rodriguez, editor in chief of Refrigerated and Frozen Foods and host of From the Cold Corner, a podcast dedicated to the cold chain. On this episode, I'm joined by another Kelly, Kelly Alvarado, Director of Sustainability at Anchor Packaging. Kelly brings over 25 years of experience with previous roles, including leading the packaging and sustainability category for KFC's global supply chain. She holds a BS in textile chemistry and an MBA and is a wealth of knowledge. Kelly, thank you for joining me to unpack cold foods packaging today.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So before we dive deep into some of the details, like EPR and some of the laws that are getting ready to take effect literally this month in Oregon, I wondered if you could kind of give me a 30,000-foot view and discuss, what some of the key challenges for cold food manufacturers are currently when they're trying to incorporate sustainability into their packaging design.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the first challenge we need to do is really define what sustainability is. And as we're talking about sustainability for the cold food industry, we want to make sure that we understand it's not just an aesthetics exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's tremendous amount of resources that go into producing our foods, and there is a lot of food waste that goes to landfill every day. So when we're starting to talk about sustainability, it's a functional decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
First, we need to make sure that the package protects our food and that it does its job as intended. And then second, does that packaging format allow for the consumer to reuse the packaging, compost the packaging, or recycle the packaging? So what are we doing about the end of life? And for us at Anchor, it's incorporating both of those elements. So we want to make sure that the package does the job it's supposed to, because I mean, otherwise you wouldn't need a package.
Right.
And then second, that we're giving consumers an end of life strategy that really drives towards circularity. And you layer over that all the legislation compliance, and you make sure that you're designing to meet those hurdles in the front side of it.
Right. And I think what's interesting to me is balancing the need for functionality in packaging, i.e. food safety, protecting the product. But then with sustainability goals, I think one of the biggest things I've learned in reporting on packaging for cold foods is that the consumer tends to villainize certain substrates or certain materials. And that may not necessarily always be the case, depending on what type of food you're packaging, and what type of either recycling or composting landfill process you have in your local community. How do you balance as a packaging designer when an F&B manufacturer approaches you? What's that
Yeah.
process like?
Yeah, and it really does go back to defining what sustainability means for your business. Because the cold food chain and in our products, we have different hurdles than maybe something that was served at a QSR location. We need
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that we're protecting for the shelf life, for food safety. I mean, that's critical, and you're making sure that our products survive the transportation and meet all of those functional hurdles that we have. And because food, I mean, really has such a high impact on the environment compared to the package, you need to make sure that first the food is protected, you're minimizing waste in from a holistic view,
Mm-hmm.
and then how do the materials and design that we're working with do that? And if my materials aren't the right one, then I would absolutely say for the planet's impact, then you need to choose the right material, right? Whether it's mine or someone else's. And then second, that end of life. I think those two considerations are critical. And it's really kind of counterintuitive that the two of these things work together, but they do. You don't
Hmm.
have to trade off. You can have the right material protecting the food and design for circularity at end of life. So we try to do both in our world, and for most consumers, that means recyclability. So
Right,
that's and
right,
that's and that's what I talk about for the most, just because from an access standpoint, recycling is it's a much more robust system, even though we have differences across the country than say reusable systems or composting.
right, right. And then, of course, there's also the issue of home compostability versus industrial composting. And
Yes.
I think I read the other day something like only 5% of the country currently has access to really a robust composting system.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. And when you look at our materials too for the cold chain, if something can degrade in a home composting bin, it may not have the barrier properties you need.
right,
I mean, because there's different levers and different trade-offs that we're talking about whenever we think about end of life. And a home compostable, if it's exposed to the moisture and an anaerobic environment, it's going to start to decompose.
right. So let's talk about biodegradable, compostable plastics versus traditional plastics for cold food packaging, because I know this is where the issue of circularity also comes into play. Which is again, what are those materials and those substrates that we're using to initially create the food packaging? So tell me a little bit about the differences and maybe the similarities.
Yes. And I mean, I don't think there's any material that is bad in general. I mean, I think there's a place for all of them. And I think traditional plastics like polypropylene and PET, one of the reasons that in the cold food industry we use them so much is because they have fantastic barrier properties, right? And they're able to do the job of protecting the food and keeping things in the right state to really maintain that shelf life of the cold food. So and when you start layering the complexity of the end of life management of materials, it gets a little more complex because like biodegradable and compostable plastics look a lot like traditional plastics.
Mm-hmm.
So if those items end up in the recycling stream, they're actually a contaminant and they mess up the entire stream. So then all of those materials go to landfill, which doesn't help us build that circularity.
Right.
So, I mean, I think part of it is the consumer education and the way we use our packaging to communicate the end of life benefits, as well
Mm-hmm.
as selecting the right material for the right job.
How do you as a packaging designer approach some of these aspects?
Yeah, and waste is I mean, that is a big problem that we all need to tackle. And it's not just a plastic-based issue, right? It's overall. And we need to make sure that we're reducing the amount of materials that go to landfill. And whether that is plastic or a paper or a metal or any other kind of substrate, we really do, as a society, kind of need to jumpstart into that circular economy. And I see signs that we're doing it. I mean, it's coming. And I mean, I think there needs to be the recognition of the different resources that are in our materials. I mean, all of these, and including plastics, are a valuable resource. So if we treat plastic, which is, what our company does the most, as the
Mm-hmm.
valuable resource it is, and
Mm-hmm.
and don't send it to landfill in the first place, that'll help with some of the waste. And then packaging design, it really can help in that when you're looking at the product and you've assessed the attributes that need to be met to keep that product safe from the time it's manufactured all the way to when I'm eating it at home,
Mm-hmm.
then that gives you the attributes you need to have. And then as you're looking at the properties you need to meet, make sure that you're designing in that end of life from the start. I mean, you can still play with the aesthetics, you can still play with the shape, but make sure that what you're doing is in line with the guidance that's out there for the best in class. And a resource that might actually be helpful for some of the members is the Association of Plastics Recyclers, APR. They've got a fantastic website that actually does lay out different properties of different materials and how they need to come together in order to be considered recyclable or designed for recyclability.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's resources out there, and it's just interesting because once you start taking into account the end of life and you start thinking about ways to drive circularity, you can also start to include post-consumer recycled content back into our packages. And
Mhm.
I don't know if you know that this is happening today already. Like I know that we make different products in our space that like I like we design so that it is recyclable. If I'm
Mhm.
designing a package from scratch, I'm going to look at what's the minimum amount of materials that I can use in order to make this
Right.
functional? How do I make sure it works in recycling systems across the country? And oh, by the way, is it possible to incorporate some of that PCR or that post-consumer recycled content, which reduces the reliance on virgin materials? So
Right.
you can do all of those things, especially if you're collaborating with your customers and the people that are actually making those product decisions.
Right. And then from a design standpoint as well, correct me if I'm wrong, things like black plastic, that's going to be banned in Canada this year. Is that correct?
Yes, black in Canada is banned, and that comes from traditional black pigments are not picked up on optical sorters or on the older optical sorters. Now,
Okay.
there's just because black isn't seen in some of the older technologies, there's a lot of emerging innovation happening in the
Right.
recycling space. And you can use colors that are dark on the spectrum. You just need to make sure that they're actually being picked up and
Right.
recognized because not everybody has had the opportunity to go into a recycling facility, also known as a MRF,
Hmm.
municipal recycling facility. I know I'm kind of a nerd there, but the way a lot of them are set up is you just put a bunch of material on a conveyor belt and then it goes through several different stages to get sorted out. Those
Hmm.
conveyor belts tend to be black. So if you're operating with an older system that can't pick up the material, it can't
Right.
differentiate between the conveyor belt and the package, that creates some challenges in the recycling
Right.
stream.
And I think it's interesting to think about that from a cold and frozen food perspective too, because if you think about how many meals and RTE products are coming in a black plastic, so I think again that's just something that I'm sure when you're working with brands, you're walking through. It's like, oh, who would have thought the color of the plastic? Again,
Yeah.
these are things that I don't think the consumer um, or the average person probably understands or thinks about a whole lot until you're really forced to make those packaging decisions.
Right, exactly. I know it's really wild. And there is a lot of advancements going on out there so that black plastic can be picked up. And it's interesting because I think black, because it's had that challenge being picked up on a conveyor belt, has had the like a negative perception.
Hmm.
It actually is really good for a color to showcase food.
Right.
And on the manufacturing side, it lets us incorporate even more post-consumer content. It's like one of the challenges of getting PCR back into a process is a lot of times you'll have a color shift. And
Right.
if you're trying to hit a specific color or your clear plastic has a like a blue tint or a yellow tint or a gray tint because of the materials coming together,
Mm.
if it's black, you don't see those differences. So it really lets you hide some of those imperfections.
Boy, what a
I
chicken
know.
or egg
I
problem.
know, right? I know, exactly. Honestly, I think collaboration is key. And I say that because when you start to look at the processes and how we're all impacted by the same regulatory and legislative environments, if we're not working together to figure out solutions, then how do you harmonize and how do you make sure that what I'm producing is going to be acceptable for recycling in your state or
Right.
in like East Coast, West Coast? Are there going to be differences? Well, let's make sure we're collaborating. And I think one of the things that packaging converters and manufacturers do really well is they are involved in organizations that are talking. So whether it's the Food Service Packaging Institute or if it's RFA, whether it's, there's these places that folks are coming together and pre-competitively talking about how do we best go forward. So I really do think collaboration is key.
Regulatory framework coming out now. So let's talk about EPR. Uh,
Yes, I know. It's one of my favorite
so,
topics.
I was going to ask you what are the key regulatory trends, but top of those trends or those issues is EPR, extended producer responsibility. What is that for our listeners who may not really they've heard about it and they know some changes are coming on the West Coast. What
Yes.
is it and what should food manufacturers and processors kind of be aware of as these laws start to roll out this year?
Yeah, well, and it is a topic that's on everybody's mind. And I feel like we almost need an acronym decoder. So I was really glad that you explained what EPR was with extended producer responsibility. And this is, this is Kelly's view of what EPR is. And it's a way to shift towards producers being responsible for the materials that they make.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and the purpose of it is to drive circularity and reduce waste in the environment. So, if you look at it from a high level, even though all the states that are implementing these laws have nuances and differences between them, the goal is really to reduce what goes to landfill and drive materials towards recycling and in some cases composting is covered. It depends on state. And find ways to limit waste and just keep
Right.
circulating materials. So, and I honestly think that it's going to drive a lot of innovation. And it gets complex because there's 5 states that have passed EPR. Hopefully, most everybody's aware of Oregon because they're the ones that have a reporting deadline coming up on March 31st. So they're the first
Right.
ones to go live and dues will start being assessed in July of this year. So that's coming. It's turned on. Colorado will be next, and its program will start gathering data later this summer. I believe July is the
Okay.
time frame for reporting there. And then the program goes live in 2026. California is also passed a bill, and they are expected to go live in 2027. Minnesota and Maine have also passed laws, and those dates vary somewhat, but everything is starting to turn on. And there's several other states that have either needs assessments, which are a precursor to full
Mm-hmm.
EPR programs. It's like Illinois and Maryland, they both have needs assessments that have passed. And there's a bunch of states that have introduced legislation, so it's not likely to stop with the 5 that have
Right.
adopted it. It's probably also good for everybody to understand that the EPR programs are for the most part going to be run by Circular Action Alliance, CAA, another acronym for the list here. And they are what's known as a producer responsibility organization or PRO. So it's a nonprofit group that's been formed to really help run, organize, and manage these programs. So they're the ones that are doing the registration of producers. They're the ones that are collecting the data. They work with the state on the needs assessment and making sure they understand the landscape of what's possible to recycle, what
Right.
materials are collected and how. And then as producers will be reporting their data into them. They'll take all this aggregate information and develop fees, and then they'll be doing the invoicing for producers and working with all the service providers on the reimbursement and infrastructure development for the recycling side. So
I was going to say because a lot of the goal of any fee that you get charged is the end use or the end goal there is to help, as you said, spur improvements at a lot of these MRFs that are just quite frankly just outdated at this point.
yes, yes.
Um,
Well, and not just the MRFs that are existing, but if you look across our country and across these states, access to recycling
mhm,
is not equal.
right.
And a lot of times your urban centers may have an access point that a rural area would not. So that's part of what the EPR programs do is they drive development across the state so that you can have that access in places that don't have it now.
Right.
So, I mean, so it is going to be a lot about infrastructure development and making sure that consumers in the state actually can recover those materials. So, I mean, it's a lot. They've got a big job ahead of them.
Yes, they certainly do. And when you mention, reporting and reporting in to these states with, Oregon being the first, is that the manufacturer of the packaging that's doing that? Or is that, if I'm a food manufacturer and I am selling products into Oregon that are maybe retailed in a plastic tray, am I then also responsible for
Yeah, and that
reporting into
is
this EPR system?
That is a great question. And I would direct everybody to CAA's website because they've got fantastic resources for who's the producer, what materials are covered, and how things are talked about. Because
Right.
each state is slightly different. I wish they were all the same. That would make our lives easier, but they're not. They're not. So
That was going
for
to be my
now,
next question. Like, do
yeah.
you see, if you could take out your crystal ball, do you see uh, a world in which we would have some sort of a national, EPR type of
Oh,
policy or something where um, it is
yeah.
going to be tremendously challenging if you've got each state enacting things
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
piecemeal. It's going to be challenging for national and even regional producers, I would imagine.
Oh, it really is. And I don't have a crystal ball on that. I mean, like if from our perspective, it would be really good to harmonize. I mean, because we wouldn't have the complexities. But I doubt in this polarized world whether we'll see a national movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know, but I don't, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be other states and other ways to harmonize. I know groups like Ameripen, which
Mhm.
is they're a packaging or they a packaging organization that really promotes sustainability. It's not for just food, it's for all types of
Mhm.
packaging when they're talking to legislators and regulators, they're trying to push so that there's some harmonization on the language and some of the basic definitions, which at
Right.
least if we had that, it make it better for everybody that's involved. So, and I do think that it'll end up shifting the way we design and talk about our products, even outside of EPR states. Because
Mhm.
like with that move towards more recoverability and recycling, I think you're going to see a push into materials like polyprop and PET that can be recovered and recycled. And I really think that's going to start to drive a little bit of the flywheel on
Mhm.
innovation in recycling.
Well, so you kind of piggybacked into my last question, but you don't have a crystal ball. But if you did, I'm curious because someone like you, I love to pick your brain. Where do you see cold foods packaging in the next 10 years, whether it be from a recyclability standpoint, from a materials standpoint?
Yeah.
Um, I'm
Yeah.
just always curious how we're going to get our products in the future.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I don't have a crystal ball. I do have a wish list. So, I mean, maybe I'll position it in that way because if If I could project 5 to 10 years in the future, I would love to see as an industry, we're starting to think about environmental impacts from a holistic view, right? And we're talking about life cycle assessments that
Hmm.
include the food and package. Because
Hmm.
I am very passionate and we are very passionate about eliminating waste. I mean, our our packaging wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the food.
Right.
So we need to make sure that we're keeping that out of landfill. So we're going to be smarter about what materials we're choosing so that we can minimize that environmental footprint. And we're going to accelerate the circularity. So like I was talking about some of these unlocks and innovation, like I have seen and been in MRFs that are creating new valuable streams of materials because they're using AI and optical sorters,
Hmm.
and they're designing in such a way that they can separate out like all the water bottles
Hmm.
into one bale and PET thermoforms into another. And they're able to pick out black plastics, which I was talking about. That could be a super big unlock for incorporating
Right.
more PCR. So we're going to have these containers that, and I think polypropylene PET as well as the other materials are going to be around. I mean, we're gonna keep them around because they serve a purpose, but
Right.
we're gonna have more post-consumer content in there. We're gonna reduce our usage of virgin fossil fuels, and more people are going to recycle. We're going to actually get this stuff back. We're going
Yeah.
to have people putting in the bins. We're going
Actually
to,
achieve this
I know,
circularity.
right? So, and there's a lot of activity going on that I don't think it's going to take us the 30 years it did for paper or for plastic to get those collection rates up
Hmm.
because the innovation is already there. It just
Hmm.
needs to be unlocked. And one of the things that EPR is going to drive is further investment and access. And I think you're going to see a lot of smart people that are driving the industry towards that.
Absolutely. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining me on From the Cold Corner. You always teach me something new every time we talk, and that way I can sound really impressive at parties. Uh,
Well, I'm happy to help.
I'm sure our audience will appreciate it as well. For more on packaging and all things cold chain, visit rffmag.com, follow us on LinkedIn, and subscribe to From the Cold Corner podcast.